Alrighty, friends, welcome to History with Tim. So, I'm not stopping with the Gettysburg series. I'm just happy 4th of July. Let's start with that. I hope you all having a great time today. Thanks for tuning in. If you are celebrating with your family and friends, I will be celebrating, obviously, for 4th of July. Today, though, I noticed how much you all liked the Lee and Meade videos, reading their dialogue. And I thought for the 4th of July, as this is this channel's 3rd year of life at this point, I would read the Declaration of Independence. Now, Declaration of Independence itself is kind of a contradiction. This channel, I primarily focus a lot of my time on the American Civil War, which some say is what was the war that corrected the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution. Today, though, I'm going to read it. And we're going to, talk a little bit about it after the fact. And I just hope you all have a happy 4th of July. Let's get into it. In Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain and unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, delivering their just powers from consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate the government long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shewn that mankind are most disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to the right themselves by abolishing the form to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now necessary with constraints them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. When no suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the rights of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called other legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with many firmness of his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining, in the meantime, exposed to all dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislator. He has effected to render the military independent of the superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to jurisdiction foreign to our constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretend offenses, for abolishing the free system of English law in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most favorable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislators and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the work of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous age, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has evicted domestic insurrections amongst us. He has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare and is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislator to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war. In peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliance, establish commerce, and to do all acts and things which independent states may of right to do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacrifice, and our sacred honor. Signatures. Representing the state of New Hampshire: Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton. Representing the state of Massachusetts: Samuel Adams, John Adams, President of the Continental Congress, John Hancock, Robert Treat Paine, Elbridge Gerry. Representing the state of Rhode Island: Stephen Hopkins, William Ellery. Representing the state of Connecticut: Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott. Representing the state of New York: William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. Representing the state of New Jersey: Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, Abraham Clark. Representing the state of Pennsylvania: Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. Representing the state of Delaware: George Reed, Caesar Rodney, Thomas McKean. Representing the state of Maryland: Samuel Chase, William Packer, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Representing the state of Virginia: George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton. Representing the state of North Carolina: William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. Representing the state of South Carolina: Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. Representing the state of Georgia: Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. Hereby signed on this 4th of July in the year of our Lord, 1776, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Alrighty, and that is the Declaration of Independence. Now, you're going to notice something about that. They say the date July 4th a lot. And when you see media such as 1776, which is a great play, musical, fantastic. My family, we watch it every 4th of July. Very good musical. And then you have other things like the kids cartoon. I forgot what it's called. I think it's Freedom Riders or whatever. The like animation where it has the little French kid. And other media, including, honestly, South Park, they make it look like the Declaration of Independence. There was this big meeting, and all the representatives were there. They read the Declaration, and they signed. That's not what happened at all. So, for reference, when we say we, the United States had been knowing what track they were going on, following the king declaring them traitors. So what ended up happening was Congress sat down and like, okay, well, we have no option now. You know, we have Washington up in Boston. He just threw the British out, but we're vulnerable. We're about to take on the biggest empire of the time. So what you had happening was in the weeks coming, you know, Washington is actually making his way south at this point. He's going to hold New York. New York is the most important city in this country at this point. You have about 3 cities, possibly 4, that are very important to trade and such. You have Boston in Massachusetts, you have New York Harbor, and you have Charleston and debatably Savannah. Those are the 3 to 4 cities that need to be held. Now, Washington dispatches men south to help command the defense of Charleston. Boston secured. New York, though, is open. New York City also holds a lot of Tories, so to speak. A Tory is, you know, we hear Tory and we think about the modern British Conservative Party. A Tory was a loyalist. A Tory was someone who did not want independence. They were loyal to the king. They were loyal to the crown. They did not want to be separate from the mother country. So, New York had a lot of Tories. And it was very clear that if New York City were to fall, that is a very big point of trade and bringing supplies in. So, they need to hold New York. So, it's very clear that will be the British target from everyone. Not only Washington, but even the Congress. Philadelphia, for those of you that know, modern day, it's only like a 2-hour car ride from New York to Philly. So that would be probably a week's march in this time of year with the heat and everything. So the Constitutional Congress, the Continental Congress was very aware of this. So what you had was a lot of men running in and out because they knew the British were coming, and they knew the British knew where they were. So what actually ended up happening was the Declaration wasn't actually signed on July 4th. It was signed through the week because what was happening was you had representatives coming in and out. Because you had, you know, like the Carrolls had to go back to Virginia or Maryland. You had Lee going back to Virginia. You had Samuel Adams running back to Massachusetts. It was this chaos that was going on because the thing was they knew what was happening. They knew what they had just started, and they knew that the biggest empire on earth was about to come down on them. So they were running around trying to get things together, but they still made sure while they were doing this to sign this official Declaration of Independence. And this is what created the United States of America. Now, this is, you know, there's a lot of contention. And, you know, a month later, you know, if you ever see this movie, The Crossing, with Jeff Daniels, such a good movie, he makes this really sad moment where he's talking to his generals in his tent, and he's like, gentlemen, 4 months ago, we declared independence. In that time, we lost one of our biggest cities. We've been licked at every battle we've had, and currently the Congress is going to have to flee the capital, which at the time was Philadelphia. But the whole point was, this was pretty much a David and Goliath story, which is what makes this story so, well, not story, but it kind of is a story, which makes this so powerful, this document. This document is the foundation of everything the United States is. Everything that they said is something that they were like, this is not how humans are supposed to be. This is not the rights not given us by in the words of the founders, again, I don't get political on this channel. I try not to. You know, I'm aware doing the president's video is very political for me, for a channel that never really covers it. But their beliefs, and that is generally the American belief, is our rights are not given to us by the government. The government's job is to safeguard the rights of the people. They saw what the British government was doing. You know, they say the, you know, Great Britain, but it was England. It was the British were the superior power in Great Britain, and they saw that as them enacting the will of a king, which let's call a spade a spade. George III, I think, is given very much, a little too much credit to everything. Yes, the British government was working under the name of George III, but I don't think, I think this idea that George III was sitting there in Westminster or something, barking orders, like saying this, there was definitely a level that he was involved, but I don't believe he was involved to the level of, you know, it's very similar. It was very similar how it was when you think about the Hanoverian dynasty. They were Germans. They didn't really know. It was actually the Hanovers where the position of prime minister comes from. The king had to do what his ministers suggested, and what ends up happening was the ministers thought this would be a quick war. When France and Spain got involved, however, that's when they were like, okay, maybe this wasn't going to be that war we thought it was going to be. But this was a David and Goliath story overall. This is the ratty little guys taking on the giant British Empire. And, you know, we look at the men who led it. You know, you look at people like the Lees, the Washingtons, the Jefferson. You know, we look at all these people and we say, oh, well, they were rich guys. They were landowners. But then you look at someone like Samuel Adams and John Adams. You know, they weren't. They were lawyers, you know, which is a wealthy profession, but that's a regular man's job. That's not something, you know, there's a difference between Virginia aristocracy or Southern aristocracy and then someone like Benjamin Franklin, who was just a philosophical person, a startup. You know, you really need to see what the story of the American Revolution is. And I hope we take that today and remember that. Because along with today remembering that today is the day of the United States becoming a nation, we also need to remember what it meant. You know, who was lost. You know, I did a video back, I did Primo Victoria from Sabaton, and I dedicated that to my girlfriend because she was in the Navy, our Memorial Day weekend. But we really need to look at what the Declaration of Independence, that's what those men were dying for in the Revolution. That's what those men were dying for in the American Civil War. That's what they were dying for. It's the document itself, you know, we say it in our Pledge of Allegiance, inalienable rights. We need to remember those who gave their life for those rights. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful 4th of July. Have a great one, and I'll see you in the next one.